Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Wow. I don't know what to say. But we have 92 people who registered for the class, 61 in person, and 31 online.
Wow.
Including 10 people, 9 or 10, from the Rochester Institute of Technology that has an OSHER program. So we send a special welcome to them and a special welcome to all of you. As you know, this is a topic that has been reasonably well reported, and I hope that we can add not to the confusion and the mendacity that I think we often hear, but to the movement forward. And we'll talk more about that. Before I get into the material, I want to start with, I hope I can get this up, and on.
What a wonderful world.
Whoop, that's the end.
I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed days, dark sacred nights. I see trees of green, I see them blue for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed days, dark sacred nights, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, also in the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, how do you? I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They're not much fun. I'll never know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful.
Well, that played perfectly when I played it earlier. and I'm sorry for the miss. I'm going to start every class with a song of some kind, because I think we need music and we need songs, and I promise that I'm not going to have Kid Rock in the lineup. But Louis Armstrong was always one of my great favorite musicians. I don't know how many of you got to see him back all those years ago. It was a long time ago. The New Orleans Jazz Festival just took place this past weekend. My son and grandson were down there. Louis was nowhere to be found, but they had some wonderful music, and I can remember seeing Louis in New Orleans on a number of occasions, and he was a great American. So that is designed to put you in a more positive mood. This is a story in the next 6 weeks of the first 100 days, which I think for many people feel like the first 100 years. So we're going to try in some orderly fashion to move through the material. Before we begin, I want to say a few words about the facilities here. We have restrooms out the door this way, and I think many of you have been here before. We take a break somewhere in the middle for 10 to 15 minutes. We'll finish at noon. There are some lovely spots to have lunch if you're so interested. And I want to shout out to a few people who are with us. First, I want to acknowledge a lady who has recently celebrated her 100th birthday, who is here with us today. And I first met Marion in my very first OSHER class 12 years ago. Marion, we're thrilled to see you. And if anything happens to me during the class, her daughter Martha will be the first one to stand up and take over. So don't worry about it. I also want to acknowledge Ralph Huff, a former state representative and state senator, and he actually served as governor of New Hampshire for a couple of days. And so we're welcoming a former governor to the class. And Ralph, we're delighted to see you. And I have a friend, an old friend, who I've known for many years, who is on the French Riviera, who is online, taking time from being in the sun. And so Lee, a shout out to you, and welcome all. I don't know whether you've been following the developments with regard to betting on elections. But this is something that in the last 6 to 8 months, or a little longer, has become a big thing. And you may know that historically betting on elections in the United States was illegal. And of course, that didn't stop anybody from betting on them, but it was illegal. And then thanks to our friends on the Supreme Court, it became legal, and there are many platforms now, particularly foreign platforms, but There's an American platform called Kalshi, K-A-L-S-H-I, and another one, actually not an American one, but it's an international one, called Polymarket. And during the election, they took in over $5 billion on the presidential election. That's just the beginning, because they now are taking bets not only on elections and sporting events, but literally on any event or happening that you could possibly imagine. Example, they're taking bets on who's going to be the next pope. And they're taking bets on where he, presumably he, will come from, what country, where he was born, etc. And I happened to notice when I went online that a cardinal whose name is Pierre Battista Pizzaballa, so help me God, Pizzaballa, Pizzaballa, who is the cardinal in Jerusalem. So he is on this list of people who are potential popes. And I understand that there's also some discussion about changing it from a conclave to a donclave. I don't know about that. In any event, I want to thank Linda Miller for volunteering to be the class agent. She doesn't know what she's in for, except for a big check at the end of the class. And of course, I want to thank Sarah Chamberlain, who is, as you know, a member of the staff, who's going to be in charge of handling the online comments and questions as we move forward. So I thought we'd start off by talking about the status of our society in this country today. You'll recall an election not too long ago where some 70+ million people voted for a former president, known in some places as the former guy. So, fact, our president, who is now in office, has won more votes for president than anyone in the history of our country. And I think that says something interesting about who we are and where we are. So I think it's fair to say our country is badly split. No matter what the polls say on any particular day, they are moving back and forth. I think we're split on a religious basis. We're split on an educational basis. We're split on an income and economic basis. We're split on a cultural basis. We're split on a political basis, for sure. And I would suggest we continue to be split on a racial basis. So we are getting a fire hose of information. And not only are we getting a huge number of executive orders, we're going to talk about those in a little bit more detail as we go forward, but we're seeing comments like, "You ain't seen nothing yet," and "I run the country and the world," and a number of other such comments. One response to this kind of a class, I think, is, why have it? It's all in the New York Times. Well, number one, I don't think it's all in the New York Times, at least I hope not. But a lot of it is. I'm sure some of you, if not many of you, see the Times and so many other publications. When I started these classes back a dozen years ago, you know, the internet was in its infancy, really. There were no podcasts. Now we have Heather Cox Richardson and Joe Rogan and everybody in between. And that's become a huge business. Heather is generating $1 million a month on her newsletter and associated activities. I went to OSHER and asked for them to double my raise, my salary, and they did, and I'm still getting nothing. So, but this has become a huge business. And of course, that doesn't include the regular news, the cable channels, and all the other information that we get constantly 24 hours a day. So I'm interested in providing facts, some of which you might not know as we go forward. I'm interested in providing context. How did this happen? Why did it happen? Where are we going? What, if anything, can be done about it? And I suggest to you that these are not easy questions. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but people do keep coming back, and even in my very advanced age, that makes me work harder to try and sell you anything. I want to be realistic. In these days of artificial intelligence and some of the world's best liars, there's a lot of BS floating around. And I hope that we don't get bogged down in any of that. I don't expect all of you to agree with everything I say, or maybe even anything I say. But I think that the questions we're going to raise and the things we're going to talk about are important. You know, when I started 12 years ago, I tried very hard to be nonpartisan. We had Republicans, we had Democrats, we had independents, and I thought it was important to try and present all points of view and to do the best I could to be nonpartisan. And actually, in those first few classes, when I, looked at the evaluations, I had to chuckle because there were some people who said, I know he's a Republican, and there are some people who said, I know he's a Democrat, and so I figured I was doing kind of the right thing. Well, it's very difficult to be nonpartisan in this environment today, and I don't apologize for it. We want to present every point of view, absolutely. I think that's critical. And I hope we will. And I know that there are people in the class, online or whatever, who have different points of view than some of us, and I applaud that and hope that we will have some of that during the course of our discussions. I started life many years ago as a Republican in the state of Massachusetts, and I can tell you that was like being in a desert, particularly in the city of Boston, where I lived for many years. I voted for John Anderson, remember him, in 1980. I voted for Ross Perot in 1992. That was a long time ago. And I voted for Al Gore in 2000. I mentioned 2000 because in my view, that was a watershed election for the country. And New Hampshire played a particular role in that. You'll remember our good friend Ralph Nader. And actually back in the early 70s, I got to know Ralph through some consulting work I was doing for the lecture bureau that he was working for. He was giving over 300 lectures a year at $2,500 a piece. In those days, that was very big money, serious money. Ralph lived on the second floor of a building in D.C. I was there several times. He had 2 suits, he had a couple of shirts, and he traveled around the country and the world, literally. He was unbelievable. And I got to know him reasonably well. We traveled together. Of course, unsafe at any speed had made him a huge hero. And he actually started a whole other group of folks who were rebelling, really, against what was kind of the common thought and way of doing things. And he did a fantastic job for many years. Well, by the year 2000, you may recall, Ralph was running for office, for president, in fact. And here in New Hampshire, well, we're not in New Hampshire, but you know what I mean, just across the river. Bush won the election in New Hampshire by 6,000 votes. 6,000. Ralph got 20,000 votes in New Hampshire. If he hadn't run, in New Hampshire at least, there's no doubt that Al Gore would have won New Hampshire. And, most importantly, Al Gore had 277 electoral votes. So if he had won in New Hampshire, there never would have been a Supreme Court decision because Gore would have been elected. And I say to you, as I'm standing here today, what might have happened if George Bush had never been elected? I don't know the answer to that. We're going to talk in just a little bit about the development of the conservative right, but that certainly was a watershed, and New Hampshire was right in the center of it. And you can't, as we all know, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So I mention that because I do think it's an important element. So how many of you have been to Alcatraz? It's a wonderful tour, and I was bemused, I guess, at the recent comment by the president that I think actually it was an executive order that 15 different agencies were to investigate and go forward and spend who knows how much money to actually put something on those 20 acres, which has become a huge tourist attraction in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Maybe he'll change the name of the bay like he changed the name of the Gulf. I don't know, and I'm a little scared to think of what it could be called. But in any event, we'll see where that goes. So quickly, I want to just go over what we're going to do in the 6 weeks. Today, we're going to talk about setting the stage. We're going to talk about the development of this conservative movement, Project 25. As I said here, only 1,360 days to go. And that means, I think, a few adult beverages. Next week, we're going to concentrate on foreign affairs. I think, heard this morning that the Israelis have decided that there's no more talk, basically, of a two-state solution. They're taking over Gaza. They're going to throw out the Palestinians, and they're going to kick them out of the West Bank. And apparently the administration, our administration, is fine with that. And we know that in Ukraine, we've spent $200 billion, which apparently is down the drain because, as far as I can tell, Mr. Putin is going to get pretty much what he wants out of that war, which he certainly started. In any event, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Greenland and Panama, the canal. There are some very interesting matters going on. Then the third week, we're going to switch to domestic issues. The cabinet, I don't know if you saw those pictures in the Times yesterday in the opinion section. It was a pretty scary rogues gallery, I thought. And then we'll talk about Doge, groceries, a very interesting word. We're going to talk about the swindles that are going on in the White House, in front of us, on the front pages of the Times every day, and nobody gives a damn. Nobody gives a damn. It's baked into this whole concept and idea of what is going on. We'll talk about the emergency petitions to SCOTUS. As we speak, there's a hearing going on in New York in the 2nd District for Mohsen Mahawi and the gal Ozturk with regard to their detention, and we'll see what happens there. I think no matter what happens, there'll be an appeal to the Supreme Court, an emergency appeal, and I don't know if you've been following emergency appeals to the Supreme Court in the last year, certainly in the last 6 months. A lot of emergency appeals, and the court is taking its good time in hearing them. So I have no idea what the court will do or will not do, or the time frame. I guess I think they probably will do something in a shorter period of time rather than a longer period of time. But my feeling about the court is, in all of these cases, that it'll be a very narrow decision, and they probably will go back to the district court, and we're going to see what will happen. Then the fifth week, we're going to talk about politics. Ooh, that's really terrible. And the 25 races, the 28 races. If you go on to the betting to Calcia, you'll see that AOC is the current favorite to be the candidate for president on the Democratic Party in 2028. So there's a way to go to get there. And we don't know whether the current president will be running in that election or not, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. So, and that'll take us to the last week where we ask perhaps some bigger questions. So that's the plan, and I thought I'd kick this off by talking a little bit about FDR. You know, the first 100 days is really a phrase that came out of the FDR presidency, the first term in 1932. Actually, he talked about it, but after that, other presidents kind of referenced it, but it was really Arthur Schlesinger during the JFK administration who kind of developed this, I won't call it a myth, but this concept of the first 100 days being something that presidents should aspire to, might aspire to, whatever. The New York Times, back when the term first became used, called it, quote unquote, fundamentally silly. So again, I'm not commenting one way or another on that, but quickly, let's go back to those days. 1932, FDR was actually governor of New York, and he is nominated by the convention, the Democratic Convention, to be president. In those days, the people who were nominated were not at the convention. What? Well, they weren't. And in fact, they were notified formally after the convention made the decision and after the convention was adjourned. So they never addressed the convention. But Roosevelt said, to heck with that, I'm going to go down there and address the delegates. And he was the first candidate to do that. 1932. And he gave a speech, which was a very interesting speech. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. And then on November 8th, he won a landslide election in which, of course, the Democrats also carried both houses of Congress. In early 1933, it was actually in February, you'll remember that this was 1932 was the last election where the president took office in March. There was a longer delay between the election and the actual inauguration. And there was an amendment that passed Congress that changed that, but it didn't go into effect until after the 32 election. So in February of 1933, there was an assassination attempt against FDR. You may or may not remember that. Some of you were not here for that, maybe many. It's kind of interesting. He was actually giving a speech in Miami. He was in the back seat of an open automobile. Remember, Roosevelt had irons on his legs because of his polio. So he had trouble walking. And he was actually sitting in the back of a car. and an Italian immigrant whose name was Giuseppe Zangara had a gun, a pistol, that he had purchased, and he fired half a dozen or so shots. He actually killed the mayor of Chicago, who was in the car with FDR. That's a lot different than getting a clip, I think, on your ear. But in any event, the mayor of Chicago was killed, and 4 other people were wounded. So, interestingly enough, Zangara was tried initially for attempted murder, and then the mayor of Chicago died, so he was tried again for murder. And he was convicted, and he was executed. How long did it take the state of Florida to do that? About 6 weeks. 6 weeks! 2 trials and an execution. Compare that to another assassination. Sirhan, a Palestinian immigrant who in 1968 shot Robert F. Kennedy. We all remember that. And, as we probably all know, he's still in jail. He was convicted the first time for to death, and then that sentence was convicted to life. Mr. Kennedy Jr. has been for many years a believer in the theory that Sirhan did not kill his father. So, moving forward, in early March of 1933, President Roosevelt was inaugurated, and he held his first press conference on March 8th. And these were interesting. He actually, also on March 12th, he held his first fireside chat. I don't know how many of you remember fireside chats, but he had actually held those while he was governor, interestingly enough. So those became very famous. And it's kind of interesting. He actually only gave 31 fireside chats in 4,422 days. So they weren't very often, but they were critical and at critical times. And he gave them from a particular room in the White House. He read from a script. He was very careful about the script. He only used words that were common, words that were used by everybody. He was very concerned about the language he used. And so, before FDR took office, President Hoover was getting about 600 letters a day from constituents throughout the country. When FDR took over, in the first week, he got almost 500,000 letters. And he had 50 people at the White House sorting mail, because he read many of those letters. Something very interesting also that I would suggest to you. Before Roosevelt, the papers of the president were considered to be private property. And so the president's family basically took the papers and did who knows what with them. But Roosevelt was very concerned about what would happen to those papers, and so he changed the whole system. He had all those things saved, and in Hyde Park in New York, you can go to the museum and the library and see that was the first presidential library. Now we have a president who I don't think has ever read a book, who is collecting hundreds of millions of dollars for his library. So we've gone from X to Y, really. So during this time, this first 100 days, Roosevelt passed 15 major pieces of legislation. I'm not going to go through them. Actually, some of them were declared unconstitutional. I think that's not the point. They were major efforts, but he was working with Congress to get these passed. From January 1st of 33 to the inauguration, FDR met with the press every day. These were not formal press conferences, but he met with them every day. On March 8th, he held his first press conference in the Oval Office, and he had 100 people from the press there. He shook hands with everyone in that room. What? What? And there were some interesting ground rules. No written questions, direct quotes only in writing from his secretary, his press secretary, Steve Early. Off-the-record comments remained confidential. He would not answer iffy questions, and he alternated between the time of those press conferences, between 10 a.m. in the morning and 4 p.m. in the afternoon, because the papers were all published either at, in the morning or the afternoon, and he wanted to catch all of them. So this was, as I say, very interesting. In those days, in 1933, the veterans were spending $1 billion a year, which was a quarter of the federal budget for their compensation. Well, there was a guy who you may not have heard of who was in the Congress from Arizona, a man named Lewis Douglas, in 1932. And Douglas, who was the son of a very rich guy who had made money in mining, met with Roosevelt every day. And they balanced the budget. They revived world trade by kicking Smoot-Hawley out the door. They legalized beer and got rid of the prohibition to generate more taxes. Mr. Roosevelt was a great martini drinker, as you may recall. But the two of them, abolished agencies, they consolidated others, they reduced the Defense Department. These are numbers I picked up. $125 million, the Post Office by $75 million, government salaries by $75 million, a staff reorganization by $100 million. So they basically cut the budget by $400 million. If you use it in today's money, it's almost $10 billion. Just the two of them in an office without a chainsaw. One last thing that I think is interesting. Do you remember the bonus army? Well, the bonus army was a group of veterans who were very concerned that they had received bonds from the government for pay for World War I, et cetera, and they were concerned about being paid during the Depression because nobody had any money. And so when Hoover was president, they marched on Washington. And there were a lot of people. I mean, there were many thousands. I think there's some confusion about how many, but 40 to 50,000, I think, at least. And Hoover called in the Army. The chief of staff was Douglas MacArthur. We know him from another picture, at least one other picture. And in the end, actually there was a clash between the bonus army and the regular army, and MacArthur's led troops drove out the bonus army and burned down the shelters and the belongings of the group. Well, in March of 1933, after Roosevelt was elected, the bonus army returned to Washington. And FDR didn't send the army. He sent Eleanor Roosevelt to meet with the leaders of this group. And in fact, while they didn't have money they were offering, they were putting together the Civilian Conservation Corps at that time, and they offered jobs to anyone who wanted them, and many of these folks took those jobs. And the entire thing was, peaceably resolved. And later, one of the great lines, I think, that came out of all of that was, Hoover sent the army and Roosevelt sent his wife. So that was a big and major distinction. Well, in his acceptance speech, and I won't go into, I think there are just a couple of phrases here that I want to mention to you. This was the convention speech, not the speech after he was elected. This was the speech at the convention. He said, quote, "We must eliminate unnecessary functions of government, we must merge, we must consolidate, and we must give up the luxuries we can no longer afford. We must merge common sense with business sense." He called for a call to arms to restore America to its own people. Sounds a lot like Make America. I'm not going to say it. So this is to say, we have two fairly different approaches, pretty close to 100 years apart. And I think that I think they speak for themselves. So let me begin another piece. Are there any comments or questions that you've picked up? So let me just get, yes, Martha?
And Douglas was not appointed or approved by any congressional...
No, it was an informal affair. Right. I don't think, he may have been chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm not sure about that.
And he was a millionaire, so...
He was.
Yeah.
So if we step back to, you should pardon the expression, the 50s. We all remember that? Boy, what a time that was. What a time to grow up. In 1958, we can start there, a guy outside of Boston whose name was Robert Welch, who was in the candy business. He made sugar babies and junior mints and all those things, started something called the John Birch Society. And this was an anti-communism group of wealthy manufacturers and businesses. They formed this group. They had, you may remember them best for their campaign, Impeach Earl Warren, billboards and all those things, which they had around the country. They were anti-establishment, they were conspiracy theorists, they were racists, they were anti-Semitic, and their politics were Christian evangelical. There were about 20 chapters around the country, and women were very active in the chapters. Phyllis Schlafly, famously, came out of the John Birch Society. They were reactionary in culture and in gender identity. So they thought Ike was a communist agent. They thought that MLK was manipulated and financed by the Kremlin. They opposed civil rights. They didn't want fluoride in the drinking water. Does this all sound familiar? So they took over, they began to take over PTAs around the country. Because they felt that this was an area where they might make a difference. In the 1962 midterms, Nixon was, you may recall, defeated for his run for governor in California. And the John Birch Society took credit for that because they were mad at Nixon, and they loved Goldwater initially, but they turned on Goldwater and then backed later George Wallace. This is the direction they were moving in. So, and then the Anti-Defamation League infiltrated the John Birch Society. The people who infiltrated were called Birch Watchers. But in any event, the Birches were collecting huge numbers of guns. They were Holocaust deniers. I think you get the picture. So that was the beginning of a reaction to the post-war activities of the U.S. government. In 1971, a man named Lewis Powell, who had been the chair of the American Bar Association, and who was a very well-known lawyer, wrote what became known as the Powell Memorandum, which was submitted to the United States Chamber of Commerce. And in this message, he suggested that the Chamber, with its local groups, was an ideal organization to fight back against the communists and the, the blacks and the Jews and everybody else that they were mad at. They were very mad at Ralph Nader. He proposed high school programs and monitoring. Remember when we used to have equal time? Remember those days? Those are long gone. But he wanted to have monitoring to be sure that everybody had equal time. So he sent this memo to the chamber, and a year later, Lewis Powell to the Supreme Court, where he spent 17 years. I want to just move forward here a little before we take a break. I hope you recognize the name the Heritage Foundation, because this has been around for a long time. The Heritage Foundation, which was the major sponsor for Project 25, the major contributor, was actually founded in 1973 to support Ronald Reagan and what became known as the Mandate for Leadership, which Reagan developed when he became president. The Heritage Foundation was started by three gentlemen, Paul Weyrich, Joe Coors of the Coors family, and a guy named Ed Fulner. And they were anti-communists, but they were also Christian conservatives, and they were very active. One of their more important early decisions, they found something called the Mountain States Legal Foundation. And a guy named James Watt, who was Secretary of Interior, appointed a woman to head the EPA, and that lady was Ann Gorsuch of the Gorsuches. And that was all about the toxic waste law. But that was the institutionalization, the beginning of the founding of this strong conservative movement in certain key areas around the country. And at about the same time, Paul Weyrich, along with several other guys, started something called the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, A-L-E-C. How many of you have heard of that organization? Good, good. So ALEC bills itself as the largest nonpartisan voluntary membership group of state legislators. Well, they're not nonpartisan, and to say they're voluntary depends on what your definition of it is, but they now have at least a quarter of the state legislators in this country as members. And one of their major jobs every year is to prepare legislation for state legislators to introduce into their state legislature. And we now have in New Hampshire a whole bunch of these people who are doing exactly what they're doing in Idaho and all over the place. Many, many people. The interesting thing about this ALEC is that corporations are members of this group, and corporations pay the bills. So these legislators go to these conventions in Hawaii and Disney World and all of these places and have a good old time with these folks and on these folks, and then they go home and they push these bills into the legislature. That's been going on since 1983. And then, and not last, in 1982, we had the birth of the Federalist Society. At the University of Chicago originally, there are now 200 law schools that have chapters of the Federalist Society. 70,000 attorneys. And the Federalist Society was funded initially by Koch, Mellon, Scaife, Mercer, and a whole bunch of those characters. But recently, and most importantly, the Federalist Society received some money through Leonard Leo, who was a top executive there, from a guy named Barry Zeid, S-E-I-D, who was a reclusive multi-billionaire who left $1.6 billion to the society to be managed by Leonard Leo. So, I think I'll take this point to stop and we'll take a break. But the point I want to make here, and I think it's an important one, is that in the area of funding from the Heritage Foundation to ALEC to the Federalist Society, the right wing of the, I won't even say the Republican Party. Many of these people were not Republicans. Some were not. But these were pretty far out people. And those groups have been proselytizing, and they are embedded now in very important areas of our society. Quickly, the Democrats are late coming to the party. They have groups that do some of the same things, and we'll talk about them when we return. So let's I have now about 3 minutes after 11. Let's come back at 11:15 and we'll continue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have it in writing.
So, I thought I'd go back a little way before we talk about Project 25 to give you just a little historic perspective on fraud, waste, and abuse. This is a phrase that has come down in history, in American history, and I'm sure in virtually every other country where there's any discussion about democracy or whatever, government as a concept is not designed to be efficient. But we expect that things will be done in a reasonable and efficient and in a manner where people aren't obviously grifting and grafting, and which we all know has always been a part in some way of our system. But interestingly, we talked a little bit about FDR and meeting every day with this one congressman and doing all that work without any outside consultants. Earlier in my career, I was a consultant to various agencies of the federal government, the Department of Defense and NASA and USAID and some other groups. So I know something about that concept, but I also know, because of some of the work that I did over the years and some people that I knew, one of the great things that came out of the Roosevelt administration was the move to Washington by so many talented people, not only lawyers for the SEC and some of these, the NLRB and some of these agencies, but all kinds of people who came to Washington to serve in a federal civil service. And I think one of the tragedies of this last, whatever it is that concept has been trashed, basically, completely trashed. The idea of the deep administrative state and all of that, I think, is way overblown. And I think, anyway, there are going to be some repercussions. But, so if we go back to Roosevelt's time, a little afterwards, in February of 1941, Harry Truman made a speech in the Senate on waste, fraud, and abuse. And he actually, only Harry, he actually drove to certain parts of the country where there were projects, building projects going on, to see what was happening. And he had a small staff. You know, today these guys have huge staffs, hundreds of people in many cases. He had like 2 people. And he wanted to know how the money was being spent, particularly with regard to defense contracts. Remember, the war had started, and money was being handed out to these guys. So he had a bipartisan committee. The budget was $15,000. Well, it was 1941. Still, you have to laugh when you listen to the numbers that these guys have thrown out, which are so absolutely ridiculous that they shouldn't even be printed anywhere. They're just preposterous numbers. On CBS radio, he went on at one time and he said, "Write me a letter if you see waste of any kind, you know, in projects in your community." And he got a tremendous amount of response. He was on the cover of Time magazine in 1943 as Investigator Truman. So that's how he really developed a reputation nationally. Anyway, he spent, and the committee spent, less than $1 million. They had 432 public hearings, every one of which was open to the public. 1,800 witnesses, 300 executive sessions, hundreds of field trips, 51 reports by the committee over 7 years, all of which were unanimously approved. This was a bipartisan congressional committee. He actually resigned when he became president, but the committee continued until 1948. And in the National Archives today, those reports, when they're stacked, take up 775 feet of space. That is to be compared to the idiocy that we have seen in the last 100 days, where a guy who doesn't know anything about managing anything was in charge, along with a bunch of very smart young guys. We never really did know either who these guys were or what they were. Or did they work for McKinsey or Booz Allen or Joe Schmo? Did anybody know who these people were? And of course, famously, Mr. Musk, if you follow his business career, has a habit of exaggerating the timing and commitments when certain things are going to happen. So if you follow, for example, his comments on when they were going to have driverless Ubers or whatever, they started, over here, and they ended over here, and we still don't have them. And so when he says, you know, 2 trillion is the goal, and maybe we'll get to 1 trillion, by the time it's through, I don't know that we'll ever really know the number. But we're also seeing, being reported in the press, the fact of the costs of doing all of this, which, again, may not be easy to determine, but they need certainly to be offset. And my guess is when it's all over, it'll be practically zero in dollars, except for the huge program effects that it has. I'm talking about people in the earlier comment. Now I'm talking about programs. That's a whole different thing. The program effect is definitely substantial. And I don't think we'll know the program effects for years, or at least. So what's interesting to me is that we already have in the federal government a whole system that's set up to concern itself with this. We have the General Accounting Office, whose job it is, literally, to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. That's what they're supposed to do. They issue reports. They estimate that there are $233 billion to $500 billion dollars at risk every year. There are penalties for violations of these laws, everything from small dollar payments to going to prison. If you transfer anything of value, including kickbacks, bribes, and rebates. Well, that's all the administration is doing. That's the business they're in. Kickbacks, bribes, and rebates. That's absolutely the business they're in. So in 2011, well, let me step back. In 1982, Ronald Reagan, you remember him, assembled a group of 150 people under Peter Grace, who was the chairman of the Grace Company, for what was called the Grace Commission on Fraud, Waste, and Abuse. And when they finished, they had 36 task forces, 36 separate groups. It was financed by private donations from business. Not guys who were putting money in their pocket, guys taking money out of their pocket. Imagine that. And the White House counsel and their office provided legal advice. They came up with 2,500 recommendations. Guess how many Congress approved?
0.
Zip.
Yep.
Zip. Not a one. Not a one. So this is a pile of, call it what you will, piled on top of another what you will, piled on top of, this goes on forever. I am not saying we don't have fraud, waste, and abuse in the system. We do. We do. And we also have IGs in every cabinet office, or we had IGs, remember? And those guys, or gals, whatever, they all got fired. So while we were chainsawing certain things, we fired all the people who really knew what was going on so that they wouldn't get in the way. This makes, I don't care what grade you're in, or where you're coming from, or what religion you are, or anything else. This makes absolutely no sense. And I think that I have to say that while the press reports on it, what they report on and what we see and what we get is that, you know, picture of a guy with Asperger's on a platform and a chainsaw where, you know, he's lucky he didn't cut his own head off, literally. So I'm concerned because I think we're missing the boat here. I don't think we're getting proper analysis of what's going on. And certainly, we got 60 or 70 million people who are completely deny that that's the case. I think I did send something out to the class, I forget now, a couple of days ago. There was, you know, somebody who said, I forget who now it was, the first 100 days were the greatest 100 days in the history of the United States. Well, that would be fine if there were, you know, a few people. But 60, 70 million people who think that, that's a very scary thing. A very scary thing. And and then I mentioned to you Jay Rockefeller in 2011. He instituted a program again on waste, fraud, and abuse that didn't amount to anything. In 1993, President Clinton cut 4% of the civilian employees in the federal government over 3 years. That was an effort that the administration made to do that. And in 1994, they passed the Federal Workforce Restoration Act, allowing buyout of workers. Al Gore went on TV with David Letterman to talk about this. I mean, you know, that was trying to communicate with people in the country. Not, apolitical to the extent that such a thing could be. So there's a way to try and go about this, and there's a way not to go about this. And it seems to me that we've just witnessed a disastrous effort, the results of which we may not know ever. Talking for a moment about government procurement, you know, the acquisition of weapons. They're now talking about a $1 trillion budget for the Department of Defense. $1 trillion. Headed up by our good friend, Mr. Hegseth, who takes adult beverages to a new level. And I think that, you know, first of all, what do we need $1 trillion for? Our defense budget is, I think, the next 7 countries combined don't equal our defense budget. We defending against, well, we're now going to have a golden dome that stretches from one end of the country to another? I don't think so. You know, the Golden Dome in Israel covers an area of 43 miles. We have a little more than 43 miles here to cover. And now there's talk about, well, we'll put it on this corner, and we'll put it on that corner, and we'll put it down here on this corner. And so the corners are covered. What about the farmers in the middle? You know, or Chicago. Well, we don't care about Chicago. So I think that we need to, we need to try and, he talks about common sense, but there's no common sense here. And I blame the press for not really calling them out on all of this. So government procurement is a difficult topic. It's a topic that I actually spent 4 or 5 years of my life as a consultant involved in. And I remember at that time, we worked both with industry and the big companies, you know, Boeing and North American Aviation and Raytheon, all those big defense companies, and with the Department of Defense and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, et cetera, and NASA. And so in the last, this has been a problem, frankly, since the Revolutionary War, when they went out to buy muskets and whatever it was that they were putting in the barrels. It's human nature when the government, is spending money for you to, raise the price a little because you can. And there's no other place, perhaps, to get these things. But some statistics I saw said that Congress had passed over 4,000 statutes relating to acquisition of weapons systems and supplies by the military. The GAO has issued since World War II 80 reports on government procurement. 80. And there have been 12 major commissions since World War II. And the system is just as bad now as it always was. Only, in some ways, it's worse. Why is it worse? Well, the competition has shriveled, right? I can remember when there were, 8, 10, maybe even a dozen of these big companies. Today, if you find 2 in a given field, you're lucky, because all of these guys have merged and convened, and there's no competition anymore. Whatever they want, they get. And Boeing is an example. All the problems they're having and have had with their airplanes, and now Mr. Musk all of a sudden is like, he's contracts are being canceled, and his companies are being awarded these contracts. It's mind-boggling. It's unbelievable. I think we're marching down a path that I think is going to be very difficult to come back from. Let me turn now to Project 25. I don't know how many of you bothered. I hope you didn't read it all. 972 pages, believe me. It's not Shakespeare, I can tell you. But this was funded by the Heritage Foundation. And if you look on the front pages, there are, I think, hundreds of other organizations who sponsored it, who gave a little money because they expect something in return, believe me. This is not free advice, as it were. And the president, of course, said he had never heard of it, had never read it, that I'm sure, and didn't know anything about it. So, and we've been watching it unfold in these first 100 days. And it isn't over. You know, this first 100 days is not like there's a curtain coming down and now we can, like, relax. That ain't happening. This second 100 days could be even more concussive than the first. I think there are several important points that come out that they make very clear. They said what they were going to do. I mean, they put it down in black and white, by topic. I don't know how many people read it, how many people believed them, how many people cared. Certainly, it didn't look like the Democrats were very prepared for this. And I think one of the things we need to talk about as the course goes on is, you know, what are the Democrats going to do? I mean, they're bereft here. There's some good talent in the organization, I think. You know, there are some congressmen and senators who are, you know, Bernie and AOC are knocking themselves out. Senator Booker gave a miraculous performance for 25 some hours, but you know, that isn't going to do it. I mean, as I said in that rant that I sent out a few days ago about, you know, if you can't count your votes, then you can't do anything. One thing Nancy did better than anybody was count votes. She knew when legislation was coming up who was voting where, and she didn't make any mistakes. I think, you know, Chuck Schumer, and I think the Speaker, you know, they're very good people. They mean well, they've been around, but they're not there. They're just not doing it. And, you know, if you look at the list of people in the Senate and indeed in the House, and you try to pick out, you know, who are the names of the 6 or 8 people who you would, you know, think would be, there aren't a lot of people in that list. If you were looking at the other side of the ledger, there's nobody, right? The Republican Party has disappeared. It does not exist. I'd like somebody to ask the president, Mr. President, what do you think of the Republican Party? I don't think he'd know what to say, because he doesn't think anything about the Republican Party. There is no Republican Party. And that's a very scary thing, because you can't fight something with nothing. You can't even fight nothing with nothing. We've got an election coming up in 2026, and then one in 2028, and I don't know. We'll talk about that in more detail as we go forward. But let me come back to Project 25 here. So you had over 100 groups on the masthead of the Heritage Foundation. You had 927 pages. It was designed for the first 180 days. This was the goal. the first 180 days. So of the first 47 executive orders that the president issued, 37 came directly out of the language of of Project 25. 37. And then you look and see, and these are not my words. The goal is to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect children. What? What? Then you look at the other things they're doing, which go directly opposed to whatever that's supposed to mean. Directly opposed. They don't give a damn about children. They want you to have children, but they don't want to take care of them. And they want those kids to go to work early. And, as the Vice President and the Secretary of Commerce said, those kids will have manufacturing jobs which they can pass on to their kids and their kids. Who do you know in this world who wants a manufacturing job? Nobody. Nobody. It's not happening. Yeah, there are a few special exceptions. We have a guy in the class who owns a very successful manufacturing company, and maybe at some point we'll hear from him about his employees and how these tariffs are affecting him. But this, of course, goes to the wide disparity in income levels. And we have this disparity that is only wider and wider. When you and I were kids, if somebody was a millionaire, you know, had $1 million, boy, that was a big deal. That was a lot of money. Today, $1 million is like nothing. I mean, you know, it's like everybody's got $1 million. Now, it's $1 billion. It's a big deal. That was unheard of course, back then. Absolutely unheard of. And so, anyway, the family, children, the birth rate is a real concern because the birth rate in this country is going down. It's going down in a lot of countries. And the administration, I think, is, you know, they're offering money now for, you know, migrants at $1,000. They want people to pay $5 million for a visa, a green card, you know, and maybe, I think, you know, we'll probably see proposals to, you know, pay people to have babies. Well, they tried that in China.
They've already done that.
And done it.
They've already
They
done
just
it.
announced it, yeah.
And so, but, you know, that's not going to help anything. That's not going to work to start with. So we have these, and then, so I think what we're talking, and then we have two other theories, or which I think I want to just mention to you because we'll come back to them. One is this unitary executive theory. This is a legal theory, really, that goes back to George Washington, frankly, where presidents have tried to, I mean, Washington, you know, had nobody to follow. So, you know, he was interested in, naturally, in getting as much power, accumulating as much. And through history, we've had, whether there was a crisis or not, many presidents trying to increase the power they could have, on both sides of the table. And the court, we haven't talked much about them yet, the court has been prone to think about that theory and to expand it. Most notably in the case last year where the president's, basically if he was exercising his official duties, he literally could do no wrong. Then we have Schedule F, as in Frank. I could think of a couple of other words we could use. But basically, that is intended to take power away from the federal agencies. And this is the concept that the top X number of people in all of these agencies who have basically been running them all these years should be taken away and that they can be fired by any new administration who comes in. So instead of having a professional civil service, you've got a civil service that basically is loyal to and works for the current, whatever the current administration. And that is exactly what we tried to get away from 100 years ago. Exactly.
Maynard, when you have a second, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are tariffs in Project 2025, or is that Trump's personal project? You might have to repeat that for everybody.
Are tariffs in Project 25, or was that Trump's personal thing? Tariffs are in 2020 in the project, but not in detail because he hadn't elaborated on them. So the concept and the idea was there, but the specificity was not. So, and then we have EOs, I think 142 executive orders in the first 100 days, and there have been a bunch more since. We had them for plastic straws. We had them for shower heads. We had them for all these pet projects of the president who never heard of this and didn't know anything about it. This is a quote: "We are not a secular nation, but a Christian nation. Christians who are nationalists." So again, I want to come back to this. We talk about the family and children, and then they go on to say abortion is illegal. We want to eliminate all the public schools. All the public schools. Sex is policed so that, you can't do anything that you should be able to do with whomever, and all of those decisions that go back to the a few years for contraception and LGBT things are out the window, and all of those things completely disappear. And I want to ask a question here. What happened to the issue of abortion? I mean, I thought back in November of last year that there was a shot for Kamala Harris if women came out and the abortion issue was really the issue. Well, what happened? It never happened. 90 million people stayed home. They weren't all women, of course. That's absolutely true. But since that time, I mean, Planned Parenthood could go out of business. I don't know whether they will, but I think they've got some serious problems. Harvard's got some serious problems, I can tell you. We have the Smithsonian, and we have the Kennedy Center, and we have the movie industry, and we have, you know, one of these events after another. But perhaps most important of all, we have DEI and I mean, all of those things. We have the Fed. You know, is he going? Well, that's another thing you can bet on. You can bet on when Powell is going to be fired. So my point here is that Project 25 took 180 days. Steve Bannon and Steve Miller, who is now going to be touted as the next Director of National Security, which is a pretty scary thought. You know, they talked about shock and awe, and we have seen shock and awe, and we're going to see more of it. I think we need to determine how we are going to position ourselves to take back the House in 2026, which I think is at least conceivable. It's not a guarantee. I mean, if the polls continue, I mean, there's a lot of time between now and then, but if the polls continue, if the tariffs go into effect and we slip into a recession, et cetera, then I think there's probably a fair chance that, you know, we could regain the House. But the House by itself, at best, is kind of a, you know, a stopgap. And the Senate becomes a whole different thing. Now, there are things happening in certain states. I saw that Governor Walker wasn't going to run against Ossoff in Georgia. I think at least preliminarily that's a good thing. We may see the lovely Marjorie Taylor Greene run for the Senate. It would be great for the Senate if they had to deal with her. I think that would be wonderful. I would wish it on the Senate, actually. But I think that, you know, short of that, I think we have incredible problems. And we have today that case going on in the 2nd District. We have a whole bunch of those cases. We have a situation where our constitutional rights that we have traditionally thought we had are being attacked by the administration deliberately to draw these cases into the Supreme Court because they believe they are going to get positive decisions out of the court. And I think, again, it's much too early to tell, and each case, quote unquote, is different, but I think they may get some positive decisions, and they could have some significantly deleterious effect on all of their lives. So, let me stop at this point. Let me thank you for your listening prowess. I hope we get some more discussions and questions as we go forward, and I look forward to seeing you next week.